Hunter Biden and using his family's name to secure lucrative business deals.
There is a long litany of things that point to an enterprise of corruption.
If President Biden says there's nothing to it, like he's been saying, then he shouldn't hesitate to provide the information and do a full inquiry.
Federal prosecutors charged Hunter with lying about his drug use to buy a gun in 2018. That's 3 felony charges carrying up to 25 years in prison. As for President Biden, the impeachment inquiry is well underway. Representative James Comer, who is leading the probe, says he'll hold a hearing later this month to evaluate what he believes are years of illegal activity by the Biden family. But the White House and the mainstream media repeatedly insist that there is no smoking gun or direct evidence that shows President Biden personally profited from Hunter's shady foreign business dealings or that he used his power as vice president to help Hunter make money. We're joined now by former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, the host of Huckabee right here on TBN. Governor, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great to be back.
All right, there are some and many in the liberal media and Democrats who are reiterating that Republicans have no evidence here of illegal activity by then Vice President Biden. But Republicans claim they do. So how much more evidence do you think that Republicans need to find in order to prove that they have a solid case?
They've got a ways to go just to be able to verify that what the whistleblowers have told them is absolutely correct. But for the media and people on the Democrat side to say that they have no evidence, that's just being dishonest. I mean, that's blatantly dishonest. They know of over 20 shell companies that the Biden family set up into which tens of millions of dollars flowed from foreign governments. They know that this has not previously been reported. They know that Joe Biden lied repeatedly when he said he'd never talked to his son about his business dealings. He knew nothing about his son's business dealings. There were over 20 phone calls that Joe Biden made to various partners of Hunter or made to Hunter that were overheard by some of these business partners. It was a way of Hunter being able to sort of show off that he could get in touch with his dad. Hunter made numerous trips on Air Force Two when his dad was vice president. He went to places like China, came back with business deals. He was able to get a seat on the Burisma Energy Board in Ukraine, even though he had no experience in energy, that made him millions of dollars. You have repeated things in his laptop where he talks about having to give 10% cut to the big guy, who obviously is referring to Joe Biden. There is a long litany of things that point to an enterprise of corruption, not the least of which is that Joe Biden owns several very expensive homes, which would be hard to be able to own on a Senate or even a vice presidential salary.
Biden is out this week blaming Republicans for threatening to shut down the government and focusing rather on this impeachment inquiry of him. Could his criticism actually hurt Republicans in the long run?
There's always a danger when you're in a budget battle like this. If the government shuts down, the executive branch always has the upper hand because there's one of him and there's 535 members of Congress over which the debate is sort of sliced around. But on the other hand, I think there are a lot of Americans who are sick and tired of watching Washington play this drama every 6 months where they pretend that they're in a crisis, and if they don't do something, the government's going to shut down. And what they end up doing is spending money we don't have and borrowing money we can't afford to pay back. A lot of Americans are saying, hey, I can't spend money I don't have. I can't borrow money that I can't afford to pay back. So why should my government? Maybe the government ought to shut down. Maybe we furlough some people. Maybe we inflict the pain on the government as well as on ourselves to say, quit doing this nonsense, because we all know that it's nothing short of theater on the part of Congress.
And for the Hunter Biden piece of this, he could face years in prison for the gun felony charges that we saw him handed today. He's already admitted to lying about his crack cocaine use to buy a gun, which is a felony. So do you think that we will see him serve prison time for this?
You know, the judge that threw out the original plea deal that Hunter had made with the U.S. government, including David Weiss, and the judge threw it out because it was absurd. They were basically going to get Hunter off with no jail time, plead guilty to some misdemeanors, and also acknowledge that there would never be any other indictments are criminal trials against him. Well, now, this is too much of a sweetheart deal. There are thousands of people in this country who are in federal prison for doing far less than what Hunter Biden did. The judge looked at this and said, not in my courtroom, this isn't happening. So they sent it back to the drawing board. Hunter's attorneys now are spooked. They realize their client could, in fact, go to prison. It's going to be hard for them to keep him out. But the whole thing just stinks to high heaven, and it does indicate that there was some inside deal going on that involved the Biden Justice Department to get Hunter off. Well, you know, that's a sign of obstruction of justice, as well as extraordinary corruption that the average American would never have access to. I think Hunter is in some real trouble, but quite frankly, this isn't ultimately about Hunter. He did some things. He should pay for those things. But this is about whether the sitting vice president sold the influence of his office and instead got millions of dollars in his own pocket over bribery schemes and foreign governments, including places like China, Russia, and Ukraine, enriching Joe Biden so that he would influence American policy. That's the serious issue that's involved.
Congressman Mooney, thank you for joining us this evening.
Hey, it's great to be with you again.
So far, Congressman, let's jump right into this. GOP investigators have made a pretty solid case against Hunter Biden and using his family's name to secure lucrative business deals. We know that there's plenty of that, but is there any hard evidence yet that then Vice President Biden actually used the power of his office to illegally help Hunter, or that he personally profited?
Well, let's see what they're hiding. There's certainly a lot of information coming forward. We need to put it together. I think Congressman Jim Jordan and James Comer, who you mentioned, are doing a fantastic job. I want to thank the voters for putting the new majority in Congress so we can look at these issues. Certainly, what they did to President Trump a couple of years ago was much worse. I mean, President Trump just made a phone call to Ukraine. They impeached him over that. So they really opened up the government for these type of inquiries. And I think we should fully look into it. There's a lot of evidence out there about improper use of government, channels. And there's certainly no if President Biden says there's nothing to it, like he's been saying, then he shouldn't hesitate to provide the information and do a full inquiry. So that's what we're going to do.
And I'm glad you brought up the Trump impeachment inquiry. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But President Biden's role is the missing link here. We know that. So do you think a formal impeachment inquiry is what's needed to find the smoking gun, if there is one?
I do think it's what's needed. And it's a fair process. Unlike what they did to President Trump with the secret hearings in the basement of the Capitol that were closed to the public and the media, we're going to do this in front of everybody. It's an open committee hearing. Both sides can testify. Both sides can hear what's being said. They can counter information if they want to. They can bring their own witnesses. That's the way an inquiry is supposed to be. We're actually doing a fair inquiry, completely unlike what they did to President Trump, and all the Democrats were cheering this unfair process. This is a very fair process. And look, I think the voters have asked for this. I think I'll often find what people accuse you of, they're actually guilty of. And they've accused President Trump of all these things, none of which was true. They're still doing it to President Trump, weaponizing the Department of Justice. But fortunately, the far left does not control Congress today. The U.S. House of Representatives was elected a Republican majority. And this is our chance to fight back, to defend President Trump, and to look for justice on both sides. We shouldn't have two tiers of justice here. What's apparent to the American people is the Democrats, frankly, want to have two systems of justice, one for Democrats and a separate one for Republican, whether it's protesters or elected officials. And we need to have one system of justice. So I applaud my colleagues in Congress for doing this. I will point out we did censure, by the way, Adam Schiff just before we left for August district work period. The U.S. Congress officially censored Adam Schiff for lying to Congress and the American people, claiming he had proof of Trump collusion with Russia, which did not exist. He flat out lied. And we passed legislation censoring him. Only the third time in history that a member of Congress was actually officially censored. So we do have a 5-seat majority here in the U.S. House of Representatives. And we need to make sure that we're all on board with something like an impeachment inquiry or a censorship or a possible impeachment or whatever comes up. And we've proven we can do that. And we can govern and we can be fair.